Hi, welcome to Teacher Jeff, free online reviewer. In this video, we will answer practice questions with test-taking techniques I used during my time. This video is created to help you with your preparations for your licensure examination for teachers. You can use this video as your additional resource material if you're doing self-review or if you need additional learning material while studying with a review center. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so you will get notified every time I upload new contents. So please join my free online review using Google Classroom apps by launching the application, or you can simply type the word classroom.google.com on any browser. So what you can do is, once you have launched Google Classroom, you can type in this class code so you can join my class. Okay, so now let's begin. So we will our topic for today, or we will be answering the second part, assessment of learning, second part. So let me show you how we access this one. Okay, so assessment learning set 2. So we will be reading the questions and also the options, and we will figure out what would be the best answer for each questions. Okay, so for the first question, which of the following is the main purpose of administering a pre-test and post-test? A. Measure the value of the materials used. B. Accustom the students in frequent testing. C. Measure gains in learning. D. Measure the effectiveness of instruction. Okay, so for this, what you have to recall is basically just you just have to rely on your understanding with the purpose of pre-test and post-test. So you have to ask yourself, why do we conduct a pre-test? Right? We usually use or have a pre-test so we can have a baseline, correct? And the purpose of the post-test is for us to identify if our learners or students or pupils have learned something. So that is actually when you would the change there is basically a gain in their learning, correct? So if I were to choose here, I would pick C, which is to measure the gains of learning. So let's see. Okay, I was right. So let's go ahead and see. So according to the feedback, the main purpose of administering a pre and post-test is to measure the gains of learning. The pre-test will serve as your base point, and the change after post-test will determine the gains in the learning. Okay, so that's how simple it is. Let's move on to our next question. Teacher Jeff discovered that his students are weak in measures of central tendency. Which assessment procedure should Teacher Jeff administer to further determine in which other skills his students are weak? So in this case, we have to look for certain keywords with the question itself. So what is the purpose of the assessment? So Teacher Jeff here administers the test to further determine, okay, so he wants to determine the skills where his students are weak. Okay, so I actually prefer not to use the term weak, but more on their area for improvement. Okay, so if you want to identify what other areas that they need to improve on, then of course you have an idea. Just like just imagine why a healthy person would go to a doctor, right? You probably know that you're healthy. However, you wanted to test yourself if there are still some other things that you are not aware of about your health, right? So the closest term for this kind of assessment is, we call this as like a diagnosis, right? You want to get diagnosed. So in order for you to identify the possible diseases or health issues that you have encountered by visiting a doctor, you need to be diagnosed by a doctor, correct? Pretty much the concept is the same with assessment. So I would choose, based on the question, I would choose diagnostic assessment. Okay, and that is correct. What is the diagnostic assessment? It is a form of assessment in which one of the purpose is to determine the strengths and weakness of the students. The purpose is to diagnose or determine the level of understanding of the learners on specific topics. Usually, teachers do this before the start of the lessons. Okay, so remember, there are other types of assessment that we do before the start of the lessons. However, the main difference with diagnostic assessment is it is to determine the strengths and weakness of the students. So that's the keyword there. Okay, so let's go on to our next question here. So teacher Jeff conducted a test in mathematics. In his item number 10, it is said to be non-discriminating. Okay, what does this mean? Okay, so we have option 1, the item is very difficult that nobody got correct answer. Option 2, teaching or learning is very good. 3, the item is very easy and everybody got it right. Okay, so now let's go ahead and check with the options. Okay, so from here you can see that I think the most common here is 1. Okay, so just like what we did on assessment 1 or set 1, we also use the same, we will be using the same technique here. So since 1 is common, so most likely 1 is a correct answer, so we will remove D. So I already get like 75% chance of being right. So now 1, so we have options A for 1, options B for 1 and 2, then option C for 1 and 3. Okay, let's try to figure it out. So the first one is the item is very difficult that nobody got the correct answer. So we're saying that this is already correct. Okay, and then 2, teaching or learning is very good. The item is very easy and everybody got it right. So 3 seems to be the opposite of the first one, because the first option says it's very difficult that nobody get it, but the third one says it's very easy and everybody got it right. Okay, so we just I believe that there could be 2 answers here, because there's a chance that this could be correct, or since it's opposite, this might be a detractor. So it could be 1 and 2 or 1 and 3. So I would remove 1, so I will be left with B and C. So I'll be choosing between 1 and 2 and 1 and 3. Okay, so I already have 50% chance of getting the answer correct this time. Okay, now let's go to the concept. It says non-discriminating. So let's remember the concept of the discrimination index. Okay, from the word discrimination, I know it's quite negative, it sounds negative, but when you say discriminate, you're able to differentiate, right? When you say discrimination, what we wanted to do is to really differentiate the top performer and the lower performer. If you could still recall, there's this magical number 27% for the upper group and the lower group, right? And once you already have identified the difficulty for the upper group and the lower group, you then get the difference. That's where you get the discrimination index, correct? Okay, so now if it says non-discriminating, I mean, let's just use a basic logic here. If the purpose of the discrimination index is to differentiate, then non-discriminating means you cannot differentiate, correct? So if you cannot differentiate, what could be the possible situation? Since 1 is already a correct answer here, the item is very difficult that nobody got the correct answer. Okay, well, that actually matches with our logic. If nobody got the correct answer because it's so difficult, then you cannot really separate the upper performer, the top 27%, and the low and the bottom 27%, right? Okay, so that makes sense. Let's see option 2. Teaching or learning is very good. Okay, well, it doesn't really agree with our concept, because if teaching or learning is very good, then we should be able to differentiate, right? So this leaves us with 3. So I would most likely choose C here, but let's still check the logic. 3. The item is very easy and everybody got it right. So meaning, if everybody got the correct answer, which is quite the opposite of the first one, then you won't be able to differentiate the top performer or the top 27% from the bottom 27%. Well, actually, this makes sense. This fits our criteria. Okay, so I would say that based on this question, we cannot differentiate or discriminate. So it's non-discriminating if it's too easy, if it's too difficult that nobody got it correct, and if it's too easy that everybody got it correct. So I would choose option C. 1 and 3 were correct. So now let's see the rationalization. So the definition of discrimination index is that the discrimination index is a basic measure of the validity of an item. It is a measure of an item's ability to discriminate between those who scored high on the total test and those who scored low. Okay, so non-discriminating item is an item that can't discriminate the lower performing group of students from the upper performing students. Hence, if nobody got the correct answer or everybody got the correct answer, the item is said to be non-discriminating. Okay, so if you will visit my virtual classroom and answer this, after you submit all your answers and you got it incorrectly, you will be able to get the feedback and you will have the opportunity to click the link here for a video presentation. So this will actually connect you to a YouTube video which will explain to you the concept. Okay? Okay, so it will link you to a relevant YouTube video that will further explain this concept. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So which of the following is or are true about matching type test? Okay, option 1. The descriptions and options must be homogeneous. 2. The options at the first column and the descriptions at the second column. Okay, the options at the first column and the descriptions at the second column. Okay, 3. The number of options must be greater than the number of descriptions. Okay, 4. There must be at least 3 items. Okay, so let's go ahead and check. The options are 1 only, 1 and 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, and 4. So obviously 1 is an option. Okay, and however, it seems like 1 may not just be the option here. It could be 2 or 3. So let's see. I would cross out 1 in this case. And let's see. Let's go ahead and check option number 4. There must be at least 3 items. Okay, I'm not quite sure about this rule, but I know there should be. Yeah, I mean the more options and more descriptions that you have, the better, right? Okay, so it says here at least. So I'm not quite sure about this. Let's try option number 3. It says here the number of options must be greater than the number of descriptions. Well, it actually makes sense because we usually have more options to make it more confusing. And remember, it somehow relates with the option 1. The descriptions and options must be homogeneous. That way, it's going to be challenging for the learners to identify the correct answer. So I would say 3 is actually correct. And as you can see here, 3 is also present in B, C, and D. Okay, so that's going to be a little bit difficult. And I'm not quite sure about 4 here, so I would say, okay, let's try to determine if 2 is an option. Okay, 2. The options at the first column and the descriptions at the second column. Okay, well, in this case, I do know that this is incorrect. Why? Because we could swap it, we could change it. There's no specific rule or standard that says that the first column should be this and the second column should be that. You can switch them up. So 2 is already out, so I would remove this. So I have a 50-50% chance of getting the right answer. Okay, X, so it's going to be between B and D. Okay, so now I just have to figure out there must be at least 3 items. Okay. Well, I actually haven't really memorized the rules for matching type test, but my gut tells me that it's important for you to have at least 3 because you can't have 2 for a matching type. So as I've said, the more the better, but 3 sounds logical for me. So I would choose 1, 3, and 4 in this case. Okay, let's see. There you go. It actually doesn't show the answer, but let's check. Okay, it doesn't appear. Okay, there. Okay, so 1, 3, and 4. So statements 1, 3, and 4 are all guidelines in developing a matching type of test. Okay, so there. Even if I didn't actually remember the options, I still was able to get the correct answer because of simply using some logic and common sense. Okay, that actually helps. Okay, let's move on to the next question here. Okay. So which statement is true in a bell-shaped curve? For those who are math majors, so this is going to be easy for you. And for those who have been doing their item analysis, this would also be easy as well. So we're all familiar about the bell-shaped curve. So the bell-shaped curve actually is our standard for the score distribution, right? So we call the bell-shaped curve as the Gaussian distribution. We also call it as the normal curve, right? Okay, so let's check the options. Option A, there are more high scores than low scores. Okay, if there are more scores than low scores, then there's going to be a problem there. Okay, so it's not really normally distribution, because in the normal distribution there should be very few at the bottom and very few at the top, and majority of the score should be somewhere in the middle. That's what the bell shape, the normal curve is. Second, B, most of the scores are high. Okay, if the scores are mostly high, then your curve is actually negatively skewed, so it's not normal as well. So we will X out B. C, the scores are normally distributed. Well, this actually explains everything I mentioned earlier, right? So I would say C is the answer, but let's check the last one. There are more low scores than high scores. It's the opposite of A. However, this shows a positively skewed um, score distribution. So the answer would be C. Okay, there you go. So the answer is C. Let's see, the bell-shaped curve means that the scores are normally distributed. Okay, so if you visit my website, you can click here for more explanation. Okay, let's move to the next question. Ryan's raw score in mathematics class is 94, which is equal to the 97th percentile. What does this mean? Okay, so percentile, by the way, is different from percentage. Okay, so do not confuse these two terms. So let's see here. Option 1A, 97% of Ryan's classmates got a score higher than 94. Okay, let's visualize this. So if you say 97 percentile, does that mean that most of Ryan's classmates got a score of 95, 96, 97? So this doesn't make sense. So I would say I would X out A. B, 97% of Ryan's classmates got a score lower than 94. Well, this actually makes more sense because, for example, if Ryan's score is 94, 94 out of 100, 94 out of 100, then this means that most of Ryan's classmates, or 97% of Ryan's classmates, is below 94. The score is below 94. This actually does make sense, right? So I would choose B from using that logic. By the way, going back to what I mentioned earlier, percentile is different from percentage, because when you say percentage, we would just simply divide this over the total items. So it's 94 over 100, so that's going to be 94%. But when you say percentile, we're talking about the learner's position within the group. So the 97th percentile. So he holds the 97th position, and then the rest of the classmates are actually below that. So option B for me is the answer. Okay, so let's check. Okay, and that's the correct one. So this can be written as P97 or 94, meaning 97% of Ryan's classmates got a score lower than 94. And again, you can click this link if you visit my website, if you visit my virtual classroom for more explanation. Okay, next, let's go to the next question here. What is meant when the discrimination index of a test item is 0.35? Again, let's revisit the concept of discrimination index. Discrimination, or we want to differentiate. Okay, so what does 0.35 means? Okay, let's check the options now. A, more students in the lower group got the item correctly than those students in the upper group. Okay, so it says lower group has answered more correct answers than the upper group. Okay. B, more students in the upper group got the item correctly than those students in the lower group. Well, they seem to be the inverse of each other. Okay, it's the opposite. So I would be eyeing for A and B. C, the number of students in the lower group and the upper group who got item correctly are equal. If it's going to be equal, then the number should be somewhere around 50%, right? Or 50-50, or half at least. So I would X this out. This doesn't make sense. D, more students from the upper group got the item correctly. It's actually possible. More students from the upper group. Okay, however, it seems like this is incomplete. More students from the upper group got the item correctly. Because if we're saying discrimination, we should be comparing it, right? So it seems similar to B, but I think there's a missing element here. Okay, the comparison between the other group. So I would still stick with A and B. So let's revisit the concept of discrimination index. Just like what I've mentioned earlier, we will get the upper 27% of the class and the lower 27% of the class, and then we get the difference. So the formula is the upper group minus the lower group difficulty. I mean the difficulty of the upper group and the difficulty of the lower group. So imagine if the upper group is higher, then you subtract it with the lower, the result should be positive, correct? Okay, if the upper group has a lower difficulty index and compared to the lower group, so it's, let's just say 0.1 minus 0.8, so it's going to be a negative result. Okay, so from there you would have an idea that the correct answer here is that more students from the upper group got the item correctly than those students in the lower group. So I will choose this option, and that is correct. So let's see here. The discrimination index of 0.35 means that it is a positive discrimination. Positive discrimination means that more students from the upper group got the item correctly than those students in the lower group. And there's actually going to be an explanation on this video as well. Okay? So next, which of the following statements is or are important in developing a scoring rubrics? Okay? So 1, description of each criterion to serve a standard. Okay, let's see. Well, descriptions, if you still remember, we usually use 5 levels or descriptions. We usually use below average, average, above average, and then excellent, right? So usually that's what we do. So it depends. You can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you really need to have a standard for your rubric. So 1 is already a check, and again on the options it shows 1 is correct. 2, very clear descriptions of performance in each level. So okay, for rubrics this is very, very important because you need to really describe when you're going to call it below average, when you're going to call it average, above average, and excellent, right? So you need to describe. You need to have a very clear description so it will be very objective. So 2 is already a correct. So I would X out A and B, so that leaves me with C and D. So now I have 50% chance of getting it right. Okay, now let's move on to the third option, the rating scale. Okay, well, the rating scale is also important. So obviously 3 is here, and now let's check if the 4th should be included or not. Mastery levels of achievement. I have seen this also in the rubrics that I have created. So I would say that 1, 2, 3, 4 is the correct answer. And also, just to give you an idea, when you are taking the LET exams, most of the time, I'm not saying all of the time, but most of the time, the one which has all of the above is usually the correct answer. But you have to, you of course need to double check. Okay, so I would say 1, 2, 3, 4 is the answer based on my understanding here. Okay, so I got it right. So let's see the feedback. It just simply says here that they're all important in developing the scoring rubrics. So for more information, you can click the link here when you visit my virtual classroom for a better explanation. Okay, let's move on to our next question. What is meant when Teacher Jeff is talking about grading on the curve in a regional meeting? Okay, so by the way, grading on the curve, most teachers actually use this to adjust, to basically call it, if in our own term, binatin ang grado. Tama. If you probably have done that in the past. Let's say, for example, I think most of the time some teachers would implement it this way. For example, if your um, class high score is only around, let's just say, 90 points out of 100, that's the highest, and then most of your students or learners had, let's just say, 50, perhaps 60, and of course majority of your class may probably have failed because you need to have, let's say, they need to have a passing score of 70%, 70 points or 70%, right? And of course you cannot change the score, so for you to be able to grade on the curve, what you have to do is simply make some changes. So what you can do is you make the highest score as like the perfect score. For example, the highest score is 90 out of 100. So what you do is you change 90 to 100. So how are you going to do that? So since you're going to convert 90 to a perfect score, so you will simply add 10 to make it 100. So 90 now becomes 100. So 80 becomes 90. Then 70 becomes 80. 60 becomes 70. Okay, so that's actually how you're going to grade. That's actually how most of us are doing it when we are grading on the curve. There's also another way, which is using a distribution, and that's going to be a little bit more complicated, but some teachers do really do that also. So let's go ahead and check which one is correct here. So a student grade determines whether or not a student attains a defined standard of achievement. Well, this doesn't fit my explanation earlier. Second, B, a student grade tells how closely he is in achieving to his potential. No. C, a student grade compares his achievement to his effort. Not even close. D, a student grade depends on how his achievement compares with the achievement of all other students. Okay, I believe that D sounds more, sounds closest, right? Sounds closest, but it's a little bit off also from my explanation on the grading on the curve. But let's go ahead and see. Okay, so that's actually the correct student in the class. Okay, so let's see the explanation here. So grading on the curve means that the performance of the student is compared to the performance of other students. Well, yeah, in a way, indirectly, it somehow it's close to my own understanding on grading on the curve. But to have a better explanation on grading on the curve, you can also visit my classroom, my virtual classroom, and click this link here. Okay. So for the last question here, which of the following situation best describes norm reference? Well, this is actually going to be very easy. So norm reference, again, we use the word norm for normal. So if it's always normal for us to compare our student scores with your other student scores, right? So student scores to other student scores, that's perfectly fine. Because criterion reference, we refer to criteria. So we will be comparing our student score or grade to a standard. So that's how different it is. So let's see which one will fit the norm reference. JB performed better in mathematics than 85% of his classmates. Okay, JV, classmates. I would say A automatically, but let's check the other options. JV was able to get 80% of the items correctly. Something's missing. JV got 45 items correctly out of 50 items. So the score compared to a standard, no. JV was able to answer his test in 45 minutes only. So you're describing the speed. So it's not really a norm reference. I would say I would still stick with A. Hopefully I'm correct. Let's see. Okay, there. It's correct. So norm reference interpretation means comparing the performance of the students relative to the performance of the others. So the statement JV performed better in mathematics than 85% of his classmates means that JV got a score higher than 85% of his classmates. Okay, so now we're done with our second set. So assessment of learning set 2 from Teacher Jeff, free online reviewer. So please feel free to visit my virtual classroom, and please do enjoy my future videos on assessment of learning. We will be answering more questions and also do rationalization. Okay, thank you so much for your time, and you do have a great day.